May the words of my mouth, may the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Amen. So one time the Reverend Brian Cole, actually now he's the Right Reverend Brian Cole. I think he's the bishop in Eastern Tennessee. But Brian then, or Bishop Brian then, was at the cathedral in Asheville, and we were young priests just coming up. Brian's a really good preacher, and so Brian had this list of like the 7 do's and do nots in preaching that he would just share with us. And so in that, I don't remember all of them, but in that list was pick one topic and stick with it. He's like, all these gospels, you can go all these directions. He said, just pick one and stick with it. So I'm not going to do that today. This is going to be just all over the place, fair warning. So actually another one that I do remember is like, he said, don't ever get in the pulpit and just kind of say, okay, here's a warning. This is going to be, he's like, no, they'll figure it out. So I want to talk about these miracles today. I want to talk about what they mean for us and what they mean for the church. So first, just a little, context on miracles in our scriptures, miracles in general. We hear these miracle stories in the gospel, like the walking on water, the feeding of 5,000, today, water into wine. We hear these with our modern Western ears, and we process these stories with our post-Enlightenment critical thinking brains. And we can kind of instantly, I think, tend to get hung up in this place of, did this happen or not? How did this happen? Sometimes we hear the stories and like, wow, cool, water into wine. And we just kind of stop. We stop there, we leave it there, and we don't go any deeper. The real question today with stories like this, with miracles, I think, is not, did it happen or not? But rather, what does this mean? How does this affect us? How does this play out in our faith? Brian McLaren, I think a lot of you know him. He was is a Christian thinker. He's an author. He came and lectured at Davidson years ago when I was there. And I remember he was talking about this miracle. And he said, water into wine. He's like, that's a chemical miracle. He said, I find that a lot less exciting to think about. He said, actually, when you think about it, grapevines take soil and water and turn that into grape juice that is then fermented. And he's like, they do that all the time. And that's kind of a miracle in and of itself. He said, the better question is, what does this miracle mean? What does it say about God? Does this story transport us into deeper understanding, into deeper relationship with God? We've all, I think, we've all heard miracle stories throughout our lives, whether in the Bible or people just coming up and saying, oh, this is a miracle. And maybe some have encountered miracles in your own experience. And I think the essence of any miracle story is that they shatter our rational expectations and explanations. These stories in our Gospels are kind of like designed to just blow our mind and put us in touch with the nature of God. Kind of that super nature, that meta nature, where God is beyond the language and the mechanics and the math of the world that we have discovered so far. Through miracles, we kind of go beyond the natural, everyday existence, beyond the science, beyond the rational, and they help us to understand something about the workings of a loving and gracious God who always exceeds our expectations and explanations. We read the story today and we go outside of the conventional notions of what should and should not happen, how things should and should not work. And that puts us kind of at odds with how we just mortals think about the way the world should be. Miracles kind of move us from a place where our minds are certain and in control to that place where we say, I don't know. I'm in awe. I don't know. Clearly, there is a larger reality at work here. Clearly, God is up to something. So that's kind of miracles in general. So now here's some things that I just find fascinating about things in this gospel story today. So first of all, Rick pointed this out earlier. This is the story turning water into wine. Most of us, it's well known. Occasionally I'll get memes about this, like guy in the car with a police officer, a priest actually in the car, and the priest is like, I thought it was water. It's a well-known story, right? But it only appears actually in this gospel of John. It's not in the others. And in John's gospel, it's kind of like the opening act for his public ministry. And it serves actually as kind of like this literary introduction and synopsis for what Jesus' main message, what his ministry will be like in this gospel. So this story actually introduces this theme in John's gospel that we encountered earlier at the very beginning. For God so loved the world. And then in this story, just as there is an abundance of wine, this gospel, the Gospel of John, it's all about abundant life. So it introduces the theme. It also introduces us to what Jesus' ministry will look like. One of the things that John's gospel does is it tends to differentiate the ministry of Jesus from the other ministries, the other Jewish ministries of the day, of that time. And so in the first couple chapters in this gospel, Jesus' ministry, we see how that's different than John the Baptist. It's like with John's ministry, he was preaching, he was baptizing, he was out there. He was in the wilderness. He was apart from the rest of the world. And remember it says, and the people went out to him. Another kind of example of this being out there, this is not from the Bible, but it's a good example, the community of Qumran. This is where we get the Dead Sea Scrolls. So this community also, they had set themselves apart. And they had kind of like rejected the sinful ways of the world. Not a bad instinct. And they were out there, they were living in caves in the desert. They were trying to get close to God, to be just with God. This gospel story today, Jesus does not do that. Jesus' ministry is not out in the wilderness. People do not go out to him. Jesus goes to the people. He goes right to where the people are, right in the middle of doing life, in the messiness of life. That's where we find Jesus. And so here, Jesus, he's at a wedding. He's at a party. He's celebrating life. He's celebrating love between people. His ministry is not out in the wilderness. It's not in the holy temple, if you notice. It's in the thick of everyday life. And so I think there's a message there for us as the church, as followers of Christ. If we are going to follow Christ, our ministry, our prayer, our activism, it has to be connected to the world. It has to be in the world. And I mean, sure, we are in the temple right now, in the church, and we're here to be fed, we're here to worship. But Christianity happens in everyday life, in the ordinary. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard once famously said, he said, Christ has turned water into wine. He said, but the church has succeeded in doing something even more difficult. He says it has turned wine into water. Ouch, right? The real strength and the real work of the church has got to be in the world. Otherwise, it will always be watered down. This weekend, we celebrate the life, the teachings of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and Dr. King's dream of this beloved community of all people, right? That dream in 2021 is not yet realized. And so we have work. We have work to make this world, our society, look a little bit more like a wedding banquet. A party where everyone is invited. Changing gears again, I told you. I told you this would be all over the place. The stone jars in this story, I find those very interesting. Those are, it says they were the water jars for purification, for the ceremonial washing, ritual purification. And that's actually a deep insight into religion. All religions, whether it's Judaism in the 21st century, Christianity in Judaism in the first century, Christianity in the 21st, religions can be diminished, they can be watered down into this thing we do of drawing lines between who is clean and who is unclean, who is in, who is out. Who gets in, who does not. And so I think just with these jars, we can reflect on what it means to turn the water for purification into wine. It's like then we go from this place of dividing ourselves, clean from unclean, into uniting. The old story of us clean people versus them, it is turned into this kind of love story of just us, where there's grace and there's love for all God's children. That is the dream. That's the dream of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I have a dream. All people. And I also, we got to be faithful to this text, I think. It is not accurate to say that Jesus was rejecting the waters of purification and thereby somehow rejecting Judaism. As we read John's gospel, we just always have to remember that the author was Jewish. And so this miracle story we hear is not about replacing something that was old. It's about transformation. It's about the change that all religion needs. It's about a living faith. It's not about abolishing, it's about fulfilling. If this story is like about nothing else, it is about filling and abundance. I did a little math. Actually, it was more like a little Google search. And so if your modern bottle of wine is 750 milliliters, that means Jesus produced between 600 and 900 bottles of the finest wine. That is a party. That is extravagant grace. This miracle of turning water into wine is about God's incredible abundance over and against the scarcity mindset. It's about transformation of old ways being made new, about new possibilities, about celebrating life. Jesus offers us excess in exchange for our emptiness. And so to wrap this up, this story, it summarizes so much of what Jesus is about. With Jesus, the wine never runs out, and the best is saved for last.